Alright, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to By the Numbers. Still no guest spots on this, so it's going to be another 1 hour sort of painting challenge for myself. And without further ado, let's get started here. So I've got a nice off-color canvas here, and I'm just... let's go for a bit of that color blue. And I'm just going to start getting in a basic skyline in here. I don't have any guest stars on this episode, mainly because I kind of neglected to actually talk to people about coming onto the show. Pretty much entirely because I just got busier and busier with stuff outside of Twitch. And I haven't, alright, now I still haven't pre-planned what I'm going to draw. I'm just sort of hopping right into it, hoping to get a relatively decent looking painting. The reason for that is I could spend literal hours, and I have spent literal hours just sort of trying to visualize and get something coherent, but sometimes some of the best paintings I've had are just ones that I just sort of sit down and do. Okay, just trying to get a basic gradient going on so it starts darker at the top and slowly gets lighter at the bottom. I'm just sort of going in between each section and getting them to blend a little bit better. That might be a little too dark. Okay, let's pull that lighter color up slightly. And let's go back down in here and keep that extension. Alright, next I'm going to take the brush I use for blending. I'm going to push that down to... I'll actually go 25%. And I'm just gonna sort of swirl in here very lightly. I'm not actually depositing any color when it's at this low opacity, and I'm just barely touching the drawing pad. So it's just sort of like pushing and pulling the color that's already on the canvas to try and like get them to sort of smooth into each other without actually having to do all that blending like I did before. It's obviously not a perfect blend, but it'll get it to be blurry enough so that it'll trick you into thinking they're perfectly blended. I'm explaining this very poorly, mostly because I'm tired. Alright, next I'm going to kind of come along the edges here, just sort of swooping them down to give the very faintest illusion of an arch in the sky. I'm going to let the drawing program catch up a bit. The thing that just sort of happens with these larger brush sizes, because as you can see at the top here, I have it set to the 800s. The program just needs time to catch up and actually do the calculations. It's actually the same thing in Photoshop. You'll get a similar sort of circumstance when you use that big a brush as now. I'm just going to go back through, bring a little bit of a darker and a bit more saturation on the color wheel. I'm gonna try to get the corners here in the sky, and that'll actually help the illusion that it's gonna be a type of vignette thing at the top. If I were a better artist, I would have done this first, but well, I'm not a very good artist now, am I? Next, same thing before, just gonna pick a color here. I'm gonna decrease the size of my brush, and I'm just gonna pull it here and blend it out. Same thing with the brush, sort of smoothing it out and rounding it down into the edge. I think probably this area here I could do a bit more blending. Oh, actually, no, that smoothed it out. Alright, now that I've got a basic sky background, I'm going to go ahead and label it. Always remember to save your work. And let's move on to some basic cloud shapes. Now I've gotten into the habit of actually using what is called watercolor brushes here. These would be the Water Sea Basic Line Wet, and then the Water Sea Basic Lines Wet. Very two different brushes. And I use these for clouds because they seem to produce not a fluffier sort of texture, but they allow it to like flow and ebb out of each other to very more organic shapes, so I don't have to painstakingly draw each individual one. Now let's just pick, and let's just sort of plop in a cloud right about here. I'm not really thinking about what these clouds look like. I'm just sort of dancing them in, just sort of letting my brush sort of shake about on the drawing pad and put them in. Attempting to make the most organic shapes that I can. Okay, I think do a bit more refinement on this little guy here. Right there, and let's add one more guy right about here. Alright, next I'm going to take a little bit of a brighter color with slightly more saturation. I'm just going to go through and I'm going to paint over these clouds here to sort of try to add a bit three-dimensionality to them to give them a little bit of lighting. I'm going to make the brush slightly smaller so I don't end up painting over them. Maybe that might be a bit too bright. These clouds are supposed to be in the background here, so I'm going to try to layer them up a little bit. There we go. And the important bit is to try not to cover all of the original layer of clouds you put on here, because those are meant to kind of become the shadows. Not only they're they're not only supposed to be the general shape of what the clouds are, but they're also supposed to provide the shadow versus the highlight that I'm putting on now. Just to make everything look a bit more dynamic. Being as which they're in the background, you don't technically have to do too much detail here, just sort of nice and messy, just sort of blotch them in. The reason I do so many landscapes is that, as my brother would put it, it's creating nothing out of nothing. This types of stuff, it doesn't really matter what it looks like, it just needs to look approximately like you want it to be. And if you're like very loose and relaxed, you can actually get it some really nice and beautiful landscapes. Look damn near close to the real thing. It just depends on how long you want to spend making it look like the real thing. I've only got an hour here, so I'm not going to trouble myself with too many details because that's just some unneeded stress. Can you tell I have no idea what the hell I'm talking about and I'm just rambling here to nobody? And it sounds like someone just walked out of my room. I closed the door a bit early, but I kind of neglected to let the dog out, so I'm sure he was probably whining. Okay, those looks like some basic clouds, so I'm going to take my blender brush again. And this time, only going to be 15. I want it to be a very subtle blur. And I'm just going to try to fluff everything up a little bit. A little goes a long ways, and especially when there's a bit of a delay in the calculations, you don't want to over blur everything and over blend it. Okay, that's the first layer of clouds done. Sorry, that's the first layer of clouds done. Always remember to save your work. And let's get on to the second layer of clouds. Using the same brush, I'm going to go ahead and color pick the thing here. I'm going to bring it further into the more saturated area. Going a bit, not a bit too darker, but basically just going right next to it. And slightly more into the saturated section. And let's put in a few more clouds here. Let's put in one right about here. The real nice thing about working with digital is that when you mix the wrong color, you don't actually need to use it. You can just hit Control-Z and try again. There's very little consequence when it comes to doing that. That's a color that blends in too. There we go, let's work with this. Nice blocky one there, and we'll put another one right about here, just to cover up that little bridge. Don't really like the shape of that, so I'm going to go ahead and with the eraser and just kind of refine it. Not really refine it, but sort of make it a little bit interesting. Because before it was going up and down into basically a hard edge. Almost looking like a small pyramid, and that's not really what I want. And let's do a little floater right here, just sort of breaking up. He's just broken off of this large chunk here, and he's starting to float away. Right, now, take the color, bring it back into the lighter section. Actually, we'll take the original lighter section, bring that down about here. Always remember to save. I've had programs crash, and that's why I tend to save a bit more than probably I should. But it never hurts. So again, just going back through. Not trying to cover up all of the shadow here, because, well, you need dark to show the light. Just enough to make it seem like the clouds are peeking through. I'm not trying to be realistic by any means. Just trying to get the very basic ideas across. Okay, once again, let's replace blender brush. Kind of fluff everything up. Okay, let's actually, once this is done loading, let's actually take, I'm going to take both our cloud layers, I'm just going to move them up slightly. I'm going to move cloud layer 2 down. So now let's keep it about where it is. Okay. Next, what else can I do here? Well, I suppose let's get a mountain in. I can see a mountain just going right into the center here. So let's go ahead and get this brush here. Let's go for an earthy sort of brown. Very dark, a little bit desaturated brown. And let's put that, first make a new layer. Don't want to be painting on the same layer as the clouds. Let's put that about here-ish. Getting a very basic mountain shape. Bring up that point a little more. There we go. A nice little swooping chunk taken out of it. Get a bit of more swoop here. A little bit of raise here. Right. Kind of a necessary step, but I'm gonna bring this up to 25. I'm just gonna do that. Just smooth out the texturing a little bit. Not really smooth, but get it to be a bit more angular. Okay, so we have the back of the mountain done. Let's try to add in, we'll say snow. Go into the cooler section. Bring about snow, kind of like that. And what sort of brush do I want to use for this? Yeah, I'll probably stick with the watercolor brushes here. So, kind of with the clouds, I've established that the light source is kind of up into the up and to the left here on the canvas, so that's what we're going to use to determine where the brightest part of the snow is. So, same thing as before. And that color might be a bit too similar to the clouds, so let's get a little bit lighter. There we go. And we're just going to try to make interesting snow shapes. Still following the leading edge closest to the light source, but just sort of scribbling them in, basically, to try and get dynamic shapes and interesting visuals. Okay, it's going into this slope here. Going into this next slope. I'm going to sort of try and suggest a little bit of a peak right here. There. So basic lighting side done. Now we're going to move into the darker section here for a shadow color. And for a shadow, I'm just going to bring this back around into the more saturated section, and I'm just going to essentially come back through and do a little bit of scribbling, going the opposite direction of how I painted the highlights here. That's mostly just to encourage the idea that this is pointed. Something, something, something. Once again, not realistic by any means, but just needs to look interesting and look pleasant. Now for one, I'm liking how this turns out. I'm still leaving some of these little black bits here to shine through, because those are supposed to be the sections that are much, much darker than the shadow. Because really what the shadow is light bouncing. Light bouncing back into the mountain face. Honestly, I could probably like erase this a bit and leave that a little darker in the section here, but I'm not going to be concerned because I only had an hour to do this. Okay, now that the shadows are done, I'm going to come back through with my highlight color. And now I'm just going to come along some of the edges here. And just kind of resharpen these lines. The idea is that the light hits the mountain first before the shadow. So it doesn't make sense that some of these little shadow areas are covering the light sections where they meet. Or I guess where they diverge. In a sense, I'm just redefining the edges of the cliff faces here. So, sections right here, you don't have to worry about that because that's technically where the cliff face ends and a new one starts on the slant. It's turning into a very wintry painting. It's very cool. Don't know how that's going to develop within the next 30 minutes or so, but I'm just going to roll with it. Alright, so next, I'm going to slightly blur the edges here. And that's mostly just to try and introduce a shallow depth of field effect. Doesn't really come across as well in a painting that is digital, but in real life, this effect can do real wonders. So I'm just kind of like pressing. Not really shifting them around, not really shifting around the pixels too much, just sort of pressing into them to sort of add a blur effect. Now, next, what do I want to do next? Well, let's add a small little tree line here. Yeah, let's just do a small little tree line. This is something I've always struggled with, painting something that looks like a tree from a very distance away. And I'm just going to take the canvas here and flip it about 90. The reason for that is, right now I'm using my mouse, and as you can see, the brush right here, which is the actually wet knife brush, is vertical, and it's basically locked in a vertical stance. But when I bring over my stylus here, you can see it's actually switched it to be in a vertical, not switched it from vertical to horizontal. The reason it does that is I have no idea, but if I had the canvas still in the correct orientation, it would not allow me to do this, and that is the wrong color and the wrong layer. New layer. I'm going to rename this one Tree Line. I'm going to go to the color wheel, and I'm going to select a bit of a darker color. We'll actually dip into the green spectrum here. That looks a bit sickly. We'll actually go into this kind of desaturated green color, but it's very dark, very close to black. And basically what I was saying before is that had I not flipped the canvas horizontally, I wouldn't be able to do this. That is just paint in little lines of trees with this little palette knife. The answer is I could have done it like this, but it would have been a bit more difficult. One thing about like developing a skill and refining your techniques is you need to figure out what the shorthand is to get a specific result that you want. You know all those videos about tips and tricks of how to get better at drawing? They just tell you to do this a certain way, add this line to that, and just stop using these tools or something like that. That's essentially what this is I'm just trying to find the easiest way to get across an idea that I want. I could almost decrease my brush size here because these are looking a bit. Alright, so let's just get a line of trees going. Once again, these are the shadow of the trees, so I'll have to go back through and give a bit of highlight so that it's not just a green line of nematodes just sitting in front of the mountain here. And it looks like someone is playing Destiny. Okay, now that I've got at least a pretty substantial chunk of trees here, I am now going to cheat. And by cheat, I mean I'm going to duplicate this layer. And I'm going to move it ever so slightly over. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is available to me. There's no sense in having to draw every single thing if you don't have to. Especially when the effect is as simple as this. merge all those together. I'm going to reorient my canvas back to 0. Duplicate the whole mask again, and I'm just going to do, yeah, let's put her about there. Right. Next, go over to quick clipping group. And before I actually get back into coloring and highlights, I'm going to pull, that's set to 100. I'm going to pull up the distant tree line up a bit. Alright, next we get into the highlights, which I'm going to pull in this brush. We got color pick, we'll do just the mountain color. That isn't working the way I wanted it to. And you know, I'm just going to leave the evergreens here. Pretty big part of art is trial and error, trying to do certain things and having certain ideas, but not actually back into the ground, actually stay in the green. Just make that color slightly darker. Go back through, this time going to 100 with the wet bristles brush. Bring down slightly, and here I'm actually going to try to stamp in a little bit of ground. Once again, that is too close to my colors, so I'm going to go back into the brown section. Alright, there's been an error in one of my other things. riveting stream content of me retreating into my own mind palace to then just focus entirely on this. Okay, so we got mountain, we got sky, clouds, mountain, the approximation of a tree line. What can we add next? Well, how about a lake? Yeah, let's just add a lake in this, because why not? So I'm going to go back to my wet brush. I'm going to use the same ground color that I used to buff out the trees. That's set to 25. Alright, so I'm just going to roughly sort of hunk in the outer edges of a lake. I guess hunk in the shore of a lake, rather. Slightly. Next, gonna bring in more green. Be on the lighter side of the section because technically this is closer than the section of trees. So add a bit of yellow in there just to distinguish things. I want to use the same color all throughout because that's too uniform and therefore too boring. Alright, so basic shoreline there. Well, I guess the start of a basic shoreline. Now, I'm going to do something that is a bit controversial. That is, I am going to... Well, first, before I do that, I need to add in the actual water. So, let's get the brush that I used originally. And we'll do... It's not really the sea, it's more of an enclosed lake or pond. And I'm just going to get this color here. Kind of in the turquoise section. And just do that. That even might be a bit too saturated, so we'll come back through. A little bit of darker water here. That has actually made me aware of something, so I'm going to bump that up slightly. Next, we are going to hide this layer. Then we are going to take this section, and if I remember how to do this correctly, I don't remember how to do this correctly, so we're just going to okay. And it did the thing where it didn't. It only cut what was visible on the canvas. That is annoying. So do that. Do that. Do that. Do that. Okay. Deselect. Just do that for safety. Deselect. Okay. Now, it should have done what I wanted it to do. I might have trimmed it too much, but we will work around that. So, let's see here. Transform. Layer. Transform. Mirror vertically. There we go. I'm gonna take this, put that below. Above, below. Okay. No, wrong layer. Oh, there we go. Put this right about. I've not given myself enough room. So we're going to take this layer, mountain layer. We're going to now move those up. This is the beauty of like working with digital, is basically you have entirely full control over whatever you want. That's not to completely diss practical. I actually like traditional and practical painting much more than digital. I have more of a respect for that kind of art. Alright. Just because there's not as much as a safety net. Okay, so spending a bit too much time on this, so I'm going to shrink it. Slightly. And I'm going to select screen, that's not right, overlay, luminosity, lighten, I think what we're going to have to do, 75, now let's just stick with 75 so it's slightly blur. Alright, now we're going to get to the actual thing of how to make this a fairly decent water effect. At least as decent as it can be. I've kind of gone a very roundabout way of doing this. I won't even say that this is the best way to achieve the effect. Normally I have a much simpler way of doing it, and I blurred it a bit too much. There's usually a much simpler way about doing this. But where's the fun in doing everything the same way? You gotta try new things. That's the only way you can actually be entertained. Right. Let's go into the shoreline, get a little bit of, back to this dark brown color, bring up the saturation a bit. And we're gonna actually paint in a shoreline, just as soon as I forgot which fucking layer I'm on. And this part here is just meant to be a sandbar, really. Or at least mud, so to speak. Yeah, gonna get a bit of a lighter color here. And let's go back into the ocean, or water, bring about a little bit lighter thing, and that'll be the actual ripples of the water. Little waves, just to sort of break up this so it just doesn't look like I blurred a picture of the mountains below the water. And we get a little brighter. A little bit, even a little bit brighter than that. Okay. Oh, we got about little under 10 minutes or so before I finish up here. So we're gonna go back through and get our dark brown color again. And let's actually like sorry, I just hit the microphone. Let's try to enclose this area a bit. So, go back to this brush that I used to make all of my new layer. Don't forget to save. So let's actually creep up. Be right about here, just to hide that line. If I was smart, I'd actually make the section of the picture just sort of extend out wide. Oop, don't hit that button again. I'd have actually made the section of picture here extend a bit wider, so I don't have to make this so I don't have to close the loop as harshly. But I'm not smart, and I do everything off the cuff. Okay, next we'll go back into the green color we had, bring the saturation up by a bit. Sort of stamp in some basic grass. This is a very, very simple way of doing grass. It actually more closely resembles moss. Like a little bed of moss. But for the constraints of having to do this in an hour, it gets the idea across. I don't think I'm gonna have time to do any trees. Yeah, maybe I'll have time. Alright, next we're gonna need the muddy shoreline here. Where is, there we go, bristles flat. Yeah, what the hell? Let's try to get a sneaky little tree in here. Now the way I've done the trees in the background suggests that they're a type of evergreen tree. And if you've seen my art from before, you know I very much have a hard time creating evergreens. So, we're going to try to make an evergreen tree. Back to our dark color. And I'm going to do the same trick I did before of just rotating the canvas 90 degrees. And let's just... That might be too thick. Let's just do that. Go. That's a decent enough trunk. Let's actually let's give him a bit of a friend here. Kind of sloping up the other way. Then out the branches here. Okay. Yeah, let's put one more tree on the other side. A little bit of a bigger tree. Ooh, he's going to be leaning super hard if I do that. Don't want him falling over now, so let's just put him up. Yeah, we'll have him go off the screen. Did I change? That looks a bit too Oh, somehow during that I switched to black. Yeah, somewhere between here and the new tree, I accidentally started using the color black. I'll have him going off the canvas here. Or them. Trees don't have gender. I mean, they do, but a lot of trees reproduce asexually. I'm glad I can get political. I'm glad I can start a politically heated debate on my Twitch like this. Or at least what will eventually become a politically heated debate. When the tree people finally rise up. Okay. Next. Next. Okay, back to 90. I don't know why I switched up before. I'm gonna get a bit of a lighter color here. We're gonna come up the tree branches. Like that. Just to provide a small, simple highlight. Much like the mountains, I would come across the other side to give a shadow color. But I don't quite have time to do that. There's a lot of things you can do to make your paintings look interesting and sort of stand out. But I'm not trying to stand out with this. I'm just trying to get a painting done within a rough hour time frame. I've already exceeded that slightly, but I'm just going to finish out these two trees and probably call it good after I close out the section of water here. So next I need to actually do the whatchamacallits, the tree branches. So I'm going to come back through this dark color, and I'm going to take the bristles flat brush, which is another brush that is locked into place. I'm just going to do this. Now, I fully acknowledge that this looks terrible, but I'm still going to do it, because this is the easiest way I've figured out how to draw a conifer tree, or an evergreen tree, a pine tree, this type of tree. This is the easiest way I figured out how to paint this type of tree within this program. It doesn't look the best, and I fully acknowledge that, but I don't really care. Okay, next, go back over, pop it to the other side, and rinse and repeat. All told, I'm going to have to do this about 2 more times because I'm going to have to go back through with a highlight color, just so these don't look like brown splotches. They'll look like brown splotches covered in green splotches. Oh, and I should explain, I'm doing this in a way that the trunk doesn't get covered by the shadow layer. So I've made a new layer, put that below the trees, well, the tree trunks, and I'm using that for the shadow layer of the pine needles, or what would be representative of the pine needles. That's so I don't lose the texturing of the tree that I just made. Because it's going to get washed out slightly when I go back through with the highlight layer of the leaves, or pine needles. I don't want it to get too lost. Alright, next I gotta come back through with the green color. So we're gonna go with, there we go, probably that color green. If I really wanted to be frisky, I would go back through 8 more times, but we're running out of time here and I need to hurry along. Okay, I'm gonna go back through with a now slightly brighter color. That might be too bright. I'm gonna come back through on this side of the trees because, as I've established, this is technically where the light source is coming from. So this side of the tree will be, that looks like the same color green. It'll be slightly more, will have a lighter sort of tone to it compared to the other side. I've just realized I forgot to draw the... God damn it. Such in a hurry to finish. Being in a hurry to finish is usually how you make the most of your mistakes. Also, I just realized I didn't roll the intro that I made painstakingly, so I'm just gonna do that quick. And I'm basically gonna use that to cheat, so I'll be right back. Forgot to unmute my mic. I made the intro, so I might as well use it. The show's basically fallen apart from its conception. turn to 0 here. That's 9, not 0. There we go, we got some bad looking trees. Alright. Well, let's say I just close off the lake here and crop this and we'll call it good. Bring back our brown color. Do layer here. Stick. Ooh, I almost forgot. And try to blend those in slightly. There we go. Now we will close this off and get towards ending the stream here. Do that with one sort of like big bank. Go around, cover that part up. Saturation. Alright. It appears we've run out of time here, so I'm actually going to call that good. And we'll just sort of crop this. Sort of crop this in here. God damn it. Cropping tool is so hard to use. There we go. Alright. Not bad for an hour of work. However, before I actually leave, there we go. I'm calling it done now because I could sit and fiddle with this all night. So let's just go ahead and sign this. Nice red ink, and we'll do it on this side here. Right. And I'd like to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Hope you have a nice day.